Chapter 30. Thursday, day 11, 8:15 a.m. Honey traps. I was in a hospital when everything you were looking at took place. The litter makes me believe this is a gremlin job, I said. I smiled when the other side of the table looked at Larry. He coughed and said, "Litter are the signs left in a hacked computer. A hacker's litter is almost like a fingerprint for guys like Paul. A gremlin team is comprised of people sent to work admin jobs." "As in IT?" Kurgan asked. I didn't look at Larry. He deserved his 15 minutes of fame. "Sometimes, but that's the first place that gets attention. Look, gremlins don't steal passwords or download data onto memory sticks. They're trained to recognize the small holes. A guy who takes his laptop to a coffee shop, network crashes, people who brag about having a formula for their passwords, you name it. They pass it up to a controller who hands it to the hacker or hackers." He paused to make sure they were still listening. They were. "Okay, the deal is for the hacker to get in and leave litter. The idea is to make it look like the hack is just because security was sloppy and the hackers got lucky. Now, if there are gremlins, there's a honey trap." "A honey trap?" Kurgan interrupted. Gibaldi's eyes narrowed to slits, and I knew Larry was talking to him. Larry chuckled. "No, not a Paul Harding computer honey trap. The old-fashioned kind. A hot, woman. Or man. Hey, it is what it is. They get their hooks into somebody at the top and work on getting the big picture from pillow talk. You know how the bosses like to hear their own voices." Gibaldi cut in. "Thank you, Deputy. Now if we might move on." Larry kept talking. "You need to understand how this works. It all has to be coordinated. See? Gremlins find the holes. A honey trap tracks the politics and business picture. Here's the part that's funny. Well, weird anyway. You know how often their sabotage saves the company instead of hurting it?" The condescending chuckle in his voice told me Larry was having the time of his life. He would be getting free drinks from his buddies off this story forever. Larry was the kind of guy everyone liked. From other marshals to FBI, hell, probably CIA. And he listened very well. "It turns out that sometimes these projects are so fucked up and out of control that the company will go bankrupt if they keep going. No kidding. And get this, there is some evidence of CEOs hiring gremlin teams to tank projects they started and are afraid to stop." Hang on, just about finished. "This shit is not limited to corporations. It happens in government also, but you probably know that." In the silence that followed, the only sound was a page being turned in a magazine. Gibaldi rolled his eyes. He knew damn well Larry was grinning like a fool behind his magazine. Gibaldi looked at me and pointed at the display. "Where did this come from, then?" "I hacked into a company that lost." Kurgan and Gibaldi looked at each other and leaned back in their chairs. They seemed honestly perplexed. "How the hell do you even do that?" Gibaldi asked. "I followed the litter," I replied. Damn, if they both didn't look past me to Larry. A voice behind the magazine said, "He knows where to look." Gibaldi turned to his assistant. "I don't remember hearing anything about Dragna investing in pharma. How did you miss that?" Kurgan didn't even flinch. Being Gibaldi's wingman was the price guys like him pay to play the game. But his face showed he didn't have to like it, especially the blindsided part. And I had a feeling that he and I were wondering about the same thing. Was Gibaldi hiding another investigation? Or was he covering up his involvement? Being a potential embarrassment to a guy like Gibaldi could put me in prison. Being a loose end could get me killed. Once again, the two people behind me were protecting me. For now, anyway. When Kurgan just shrugged, Gibaldi turned on me and asked, "Why were you hacking into a drug company?" The Gibaldis of the world have a huge advantage. They can play their games all day long. I was losing patience and decided to hell with it. I was trying to find out why my wife was murdered. "Not who?" Gibaldi asked. "Not at the time, no. Remember, you put me in witness protection because we know who did it. I was just trying to find out why," I said. Gibaldi nodded and said, "Yes, I think we've covered that. And you claim not to know. What else did your hacking uncover?" "Not a damn thing. I stopped," I replied. "And why did you do that?" he snapped. "I was told Nikki was in WITSEC. Finding the man who killed my wife was more important than the why," I said. The room was silent enough to hear a lawyer's fine print. "Who told you that?" Gibaldi asked. When I didn't answer right away, he simply got up and left. Kurgan followed him like any well-trained attack dog. They returned 5 minutes later. Who told you that? Gibaldi repeated, as he plopped his penguin-shaped butt down into the chair. A doctor, I replied. Once again, both men leaned back and stared at me. I pointed to the screen. I have all of it documented, and I'll hand it over. You'll find it interesting. I turned to Larry and Riley. They looked more confused than their rivals on the other side of the table. It's okay. I know it was above your pay grade, I said. Turning back around, I looked Gibaldi in the eye. But not yours, asshole. Gibaldi puffed out his chipmunk cheeks, looked up at the ceiling, and blew out a long stream of air. Then he looked down at the table, at me, gave his skinny assistant a warning glance, and did the air thing again. Kurgan looked at me, rolled his eyes, and leaned back in his chair, settling in for what he knew was coming, the foundation for the cover-up. Gibaldi knew how to deliver a monologue. I'll give him that. His improbable young life had been choreographed to prepare him for just this moment in time. My account of Nicky's systematic destruction of competing ventures reminded him of his sister. Manipulation of drug trials brought back fond memories of prep school debate team rivalries. He especially loved the names: Gremlins, Litter, and Honey Traps, promising to make sure his staff learned the jargon. Perhaps he could arrange for Deputy Burns to visit them and do a workshop. He sighed and looked at me the way a chipmunk looks at an acorn that will never grow into an oak. Unfortunately, Mr. Harding, as entertaining as it all is, perhaps because Broadway has been pathetic this season, it is not why I came all this way. Your immunity, that paper you just signed, depends on you telling me something highly specific about your criminal involvement with Frank Dragna. In point of fact, those are its exact words. Mr. Harding, I must confess, I lied. I only agreed to come out here because your attorney here told me there is a guest ranch in the mountains that serves Rocky Mountain oysters to select customers. Something I have always wanted to try. I understand the scenery on the drive up is nothing less than spectacular. I want to enjoy every mile. So the real question is what Mr. Kurgan will do tonight. Is he going to be able to enjoy Denver's fine dining? Or is he going to spend it getting you to jail in time for a bologna sandwich, and then spend most of the night preparing what will have to be a record number of felony indictments? I stole over $33 million from Frank Dragna, I cut in, unfairly glancing at Henry, who was, after all, only living up to his reputation. He gave me a wry smile and a "what the fuck did you expect" shrug. Gibaldi's face got on the same page. If he had held a pistol, I would have heard it cock. When? As in exactly when? He snapped. About 5 minutes before I cut the head off a snake. Henry jumped in. I was clear that I did not know anything about the specific criminal activity. Gibaldi acknowledged my lawyer's non-culpability with a slight nod, not bothering to look at him. I was pretty sure that was not a good thing for me. Why? Gibaldi asked me. That caught me off guard. I almost looked at my turncoat lawyer. When I pulled the trigger on my plan, I thought I had little time left before degenerating into a slobbering wreck. So I had thrown a Hail Mary pass to lure Nicky to me. I knew it didn't stand a chance, but at least it got a single mother out of the clutches of the Cottonwood HOA. Why does anyone steal millions of dollars? I asked. He sighed theatrically and said, What I meant was, why did you wait until a few days ago? Oh, you know us fanciful types, gremlins, spooks, and phases of the moon. The important thing is that it is highly specific criminal involvement with Dragna, I replied. Without moving his shoulders, he moved his head closer, a snapping turtle coming out of its shell. His eyes peered at me with an intensity I'd never experienced. I knew then I was looking at the real Peter Gibaldi, and felt a drop of sweat roll down my back. Prove it, he said, in a flat voice devoid of inflection. I already showed it to you. You weren't paying attention. Here, I'll pull it back up. Remember, this is Dragna's financial information from your system. One of his accounts had a little over $38 million plus change. Here is just the change. I left $10,419.28 so you can monitor who cleans it out. Here is the wire transfer with a timestamp to an account with my name. Here is $38 million worth of Bitcoin purchased from that account. And here is the password. Sorry, just kidding. I probably could have done it all from scratch, but why bother? I knew you guys collect metadata along with the data specified in the court orders. Metadata is data about the data, Larry, my interpreter, interjected. Thanks, Larry. I forget I'm talking to people who aren't tech-savvy. And I also knew that you could hardly avoid getting passwords. You guys are keylogging, recording screen sessions, and intercepting every damn byte going to the cloud. But come on, storing passwords so you can use AI to predict them for individuals? You have a database with people's passwords, for God's sake. Gibaldi got to his feet and pointed a finger at me. Stay here. Willis, with me, Gibaldi ordered. He glanced at Larry and Riley when I rose. Restroom. He'll be back, Riley told him. Of course, Gibaldi waited until I came out to go in and didn't return my smile. Kurgan, being younger, was on the phone in the hallway, putting service to the country first. I stretched my legs and wandered close enough to him to merit an outstretched palm. After the third time, he fled up a stairway. This delayed things, because he was nowhere to be found when Gibaldi finally emerged. The texting began, and Gibaldi gave me a venomous look as he headed to the stairway exit. I hung out until they appeared. Being the gracious host, I waved them through the conference room door ahead of me. Like most uninvited guests, Gibaldi was rude, his voice brittle with anger. He started talking to my back as I walked to my side of the table. Your information checks out. We have reason to believe it is a payoff, or you're turning Dragna's cash into bitcoins. I took my time getting my snake-bitten leg comfortable. Really? You just signed an affidavit saying you had no knowledge of Dragna and me having anything to do with one another. Are you telling me you lied? I asked. The trouble with being the big dog is that no one but other big dogs fucks with you. As far as he was concerned, I was an annoying flea. I think he was angrier at being angry than with me, which threw him off his game. Look, Peter, I'm cool. I wouldn't have said anything if I knew you were withholding information, but that's for another day. The point is that I agreed to tell you about a specific criminal activity, and I did. If you think I was doing something other than stealing millions of dollars, fine. Tell you what, go ask Frank Dragna if he paid me off and why. I'll explain to him why it was so easy to steal from a venture capitalist. But he had recovered and was now smiling. Oh, I did not mean to give you the impression your immunity was at risk. It isn't. Not at this moment. But, by your own admission, you committed a crime while in WITSEC. And as you know, that is unacceptable. So, as of this moment, you are out of the program. Not as of this moment, sir. He is in a public hospital where others could be at risk. We cannot leave him or the people around him unprotected, Riley said in an even voice. I wondered if the glare he leveled at her counted as mansplaining. My bad, Deputy Montoya. Please notice I am not holding a lethal cell phone in either hand. I was warned to be careful around you. Certainly, you protect him until he leaves. But not a goddamn minute longer. Am I clear? He growled. Yes, sir, but I will protect him until informed by my immediate superior. That's just protocol. After losing a staring match with a woman worth 10 of him, he looked back at me. I ejected the memory stick from my laptop and slid it across the table to him. Kurgan reached to take it, that being one of the things a good squire does. With surprising quickness, even for a killer chipmunk, Gibaldi snatched it and slipped it into his coat pocket. Mr. Harding, be aware that everything you have shown us was stolen, all of it confidential and some of it classified. If I find that you have retained any of this information from Homeland Security, I will see you prosecuted. Mr. Harding, I will be watching you. I'll take your computer. I turned the laptop around without hesitation and pushed it over to him. Gibaldi looked at the web of cracks, then at Kurgan, who shrugged. Gibaldi's eyes narrowed. What the hell is this? He asked. A new form of encryption, I said. He closed it, tucked it under his arm, and turned to leave. The meeting was over. It didn't make sense. Not a word about $38 million. Then I had a hunch, but not a hunch as defined by Webster. A conjecture, guess, or hypothesis. Some in artificial intelligence believe that a hunch is something you know beyond doubt without evidence or proof. According to them, it's so uniquely human and ubiquitous, the hunch should replace the Turing test to determine whether a computer has become substantially human-like. I tossed out the hunch like I was tossing a fat worm in front of a big brown trout. Since I'm being booted from WITSEC, is there any chance you might help me get my passport renewed? I seem to have lost my last one. He didn't slow down, but swam towards my worm like it wasn't there. He sucked in the worm, hook, line, and sinker like I knew he would. Kurgan, the smaller fish, opened his mouth, shut it, opened it again, shut it again, and looked at me, raising an eyebrow. I had a hunch that he wanted to clap. Mr. Harding, I suppose you will just hack in and get one sent to you if I turn you down. Then we'll have to find you, arrest you, and be forced to indulge in your fantasies about venture capitalists undermining capitalism, gremlins in our pharmaceutical sector, and evil surgeons. You need help, Mr. Harding, not incarceration. Once again, his eyes glittered with diamond hardness, while his mouth smiled warmly. If you really did steal millions of dollars from Frank Dragna, I believe you are in extreme danger when he learns of it, which he will. Oh, don't worry. It won't be from us. He paused to let that sink in. When I nodded, he continued, his eyes twinkling. He ran a tongue across his lower lip, as though savoring the taste of fresh kill. So what do I do, Mr. Harding? The principles of my office no longer allow me to protect you. Yet you stole money from a man who runs his ice cream truck all over the country to every conceivable criminal enterprise imaginable. I'm afraid to tell you that despite what you think you've learned from hacking into our systems, we, the experts, know that Frank Dragna is not some criminal genius. I'll give you he is smart, but he is only a low-level money launderer. I'm sorry to tell you this, Mr. Harding, because I am aware that before your unfortunate incident, you worked for us on many occasions and did extraordinary work. But, Mr. Harding, you are a systems engineer, not a trained law enforcement professional. And like all conspiracy enthusiasts, you are, as I said, slightly delusional. Once again, a pause from the pregnant penguin. I lowered my eyes to the table as though disappointed. Gibaldi's chubby cheeks twitched, and he continued in the voice of a king granting leniency to a loyal subject who has behaved poorly. To his credit, he had the voice part down pat. Given the breadth, range, and diversity of Frank Dragna's clients in this country, he will find you when he comes looking for you. Given that you were only following your predilections when illegally hacking into the DOJ, your lawyer could argue diminished capacity or even lack of criminal intent. Right, Henry? Henry, the double agent, nodded sagely. Gibaldi put his finger to his lips and gazed at the ceiling, clearly pondering my fate. Then, with a sad shake of his jowls, he turned his head to face Kurgan. Kurgan, I don't see we have any choice, do we? Not that long ago, this man was on our side. While he has unfortunately made some poor decisions, we can't let Dragna hunt him down. Call our driver and tell him to meet Henry and me out front. Tell him to call the pilot. It's wheels up in an hour. Then I want you to call the office on your way to the airport. Tell Hanson we need an expedited passport update, and don't take any of his shit. I want that passport waiting for you when you land. Henry tells me that the breakfasts at the ranch are unbeatable. We might even take a trail ride. So as long as you are back here and deliver the passport to the marshals by noon, that's enough time. Never mind, make it 2 o'clock. Proving he wasn't a lapdog, Kurgan didn't reply, but began putting papers back into the satchel. When Kurgan reached out for my laptop, Gibaldi shook his head. I think I will hang on to this for the time being. Mr. Harding, I have your assurance that everything you have collected is either on this laptop or on the memory stick? I should tell you that now is not the time to pull a Snowden on the U.S. government. Our patience with the Russians is stretched a little thin. No, everything I collected is not on those devices, I replied evenly. Gibaldi sucked in his cheeks, which was no small feat, and glared at me. And just where the hell is it? He asked. Well, Peter, it and much more is on your systems. And speaking of Russians, I know they could have it any time they want. Maybe you should give me my old job back. You guys have definitely gone downhill. He blew out a puff of relief before realizing it. Thank you for the generous offer, Paul, but I am positive that your security clearances have lapsed. And we both know you wouldn't pass the background checks. Ready, Henry? Daylight is burning. I've always wanted to say that. He turned and walked away, confident Henry would follow, which he did. As Henry stood, he murmured, Well played. Remember, my deal was getting him here. Period. Your money will be in your account as soon as I can get to a computer. Maybe if you had acted more like my attorney, I could be sending it to you right now, I murmured loudly back. He frowned and said, I'll call you later tonight. I smiled and said, Sorry, that number is no longer in service. I have strong hands, and it was a cheap burner. I placed it on the sharp edge of the table and bent it into a 90-degree angle. That old cigar-smelling fart had seen much more impressive acts by much bigger and more serious men than me. He bent close to my ear and whispered, "Just remember, Junior, I know most of the guys Dragna knows. Make sure you get me what you promised. Then do yourself a favor. Get out of the fucking country. Oh yeah, and get a new face." I watched him hustle after his new master. His problem was going to be how to hang on to his money, keeping it where I couldn't find it. Until then, I would think of it as my new face fund. Kurgan waited until his boss took the elevator before turning to Larry and Riley. "How in the hell did you keep this guy alive?" Riley shook her head and said, "You have no idea." Then Kurgan surprised me by reaching across the table to shake my hand. "Paul, thank you for a very interesting day. Not many can play Gibaldi like that. But you do know why he is getting that passport." "I suppose it's so that he has a starting place to search for me," I replied. He nodded. "Yeah, that's part of it. The bigger thing is that he never wants to see or even think about you ever again. This is not the kind of man you want thinking about you. Whatever Dragna may or may not be, he is not even close to Gibaldi's league. So take your lawyer's advice. Get out of the country, get a new face, find somewhere far away to retire." I shook Kurgan's hand. He heaved the satchel off of the table, head nodded goodbye to my marshals, took out his cell phone, and walked away. I watched as the skinny bastard took the stairs. It explained a lot. "Yeah, well, Gibaldi has no idea what kind of guy I am," I said as I turned to Larry and Riley. "What kind of guy is that?" Riley asked. "I behead snakes." When they could speak, Larry wiped his eyes and said, "Yeah, look where you ended up." He glanced at Riley and she nodded. He coughed and spoke for both of them. Hey, couple things. I got a call from Adeline this morning that now makes a lot of sense. She said to tell you she took the 15 and is headed back to California. Wants me to give you her number and says if you don't call, she'll track me down. Oh yeah, and she says not to fuck around on her. Her words," he said. "Oh, shit," I said. "Yeah, oh shit," Riley repeated and hugged me. "And the second thing?" I asked, feeling queasy since Larry tended to lead with the good news. He coughed and I clenched my jaw. About Nicky, are you telling me Weeble told you he was in Witsec?" Larry asked. "Yeah, well, initially, and then one of his guys tried to undo it, which only made it worse." "What do you mean, one of his guys? While you were in the program, under my watch? Are you fucking kidding me?" Brushing Riley's hand away, he said in a low voice. "And you never asked me?" he snapped. I stepped up so we were nose to nose and said, "What the fuck would you say, Larry? You're saying you'd tell me? Bullshit." I watched his blue eyes slowly go from anger to hurt. They were moving to acceptance when he stepped back and looked away. "Okay, Larry, so tell me now, is Nicky in Witsec?" I asked. "Fuck you," he said, brushed past me and walked out the door. I turned to Riley expecting anger and was surprised to see a deep sadness in her eyes. I sat down and waited. She looked at me for a long time before finally sitting beside me. Without looking at me, she said, "Paul, he thinks the world of you. He just might have told you if he knew something. Thank God he didn't and doesn't, and neither do I. All we've heard is that Nicky is off the grid. Why didn't you tell Larry what was going on?" "I think you know why," I said, looking down at the floor. "You thought he was hiding it from you, which made you mad," she replied. "Yeah, I was pissed off for a while, and then I realized that he was between a rock and a hard spot." "So you said fuck it and went dark?" she asked, her voice now tight with anger. When I didn't reply, she got to her feet, stood too close for me to stand, and looked down at me. She did it on purpose. It gave me a choice. Tip my head back to look up at her, and raise my eyes to meet hers, a supplicant to a queen. Or I could just look down at the floor in abject shame. She backed up when I stared at her crotch inches from my nose. I stood and stepped in close, too close. I backed up. "Riley, what the hell was I supposed to do?" She shook her head. "Oh, I don't know. Talk? And if it were true, where did that leave the only friend I have?" She looked down the empty hallway where Larry had disappeared and sighed. "You know what, Paul? Fuck you and Larry. Find your own way back to your room in this maze. I hope Nicky is waiting for you. With any luck, he has already capped Larry. You two drinking buddies are a pain in the ass. Hey, I haven't had a drink in 6 days. I'm a new man. You were unconscious for 3, and beer is not on the hospital menu. Yeah, I know you complained, and you're still on pain meds. she said as she walked out the door, before I could tell her that I needed support, not judgment, in my new life. By the time I found my room, my leg throbbed. I passed the same visitors and some patients multiple times, all of us too embarrassed to ask how to escape. I was pretty sure I walked by 2 dead guys on gurneys, although it was hard to tell. Old farts tend to look pretty much alike, so it may have just been one guy, and he may not have been dead. Back in my room, I rang for meds and tried to take my mind off the pain. Then I opened the box Riley had tossed onto my bad leg. I wondered why I still loved getting a new laptop. Sure, slimmer, lighter, keys without finger junk, and in my case, a better screen. I wasn't a gamer, nor did I watch movies very often, and every laptop for the past 3 years had more power than I needed. They didn't even bother to spray it with the new car smell. Still, I couldn't wait to load it up. It was more than being tired of looking through the spiderweb cracks. I'm not even sure why I loaded it up. I planned to say goodbye to Larry and Riley in the driveway. Then, as soon as they were out of sight, I would head to the footbridge, cross the river, and go back to my home away from home, this hospital. It had one of the best plastic surgery facilities in the country. Once healed, I was heading for some place in America I had never been. That was my only requirement. I had asked for the passport to make Gibaldi think I was leaving the country. My plan was simple. Create a digital trail of travel based on where the surveillance wasn't working. No one would consider it a coincidence. Instead, they would attribute the failures to me. By the time anyone caught on, I would be old news and not worth worrying about. I wondered if Gabriella, who hadn't bothered to make a trip across town, would show at the mansion to at least see me off. Maybe that was why I reloaded my mansion monitoring programs. Maybe I expected to see her in a mirror or window reflection. Or maybe I was bored, because there wasn't anything left for me to do until Larry and Riley dropped me off at the mansion. Or maybe I wanted to take my new improved laptop out for a spin. As advertised, the latest in laptop screens showed my kitchen with sparkling clarity, especially the man wearing gloves and a ponytail sticking out the back of his cap, reaching into my refrigerator for one of my beers.